You're listening to the UKC Hunting Ops Podcast, celebrating hunting dog heritage, competition, and community. United Kennel Club has been the hunting dog sports home for coonhounds, beagles, retrievers, pointers, cur, feist, and more for over 125 years.
In this edition, we will take a look at the preface to the running rules and Rule 1, which discusses all things related to deadlines. The preface here is what you'll find at the beginning of the night hunt. Honor rules here at the very beginning. 2 paragraphs here real quick, and I'm going to read them for you, and we could have some discussion afterwards. It says, in addition to the rules on the scorecard, the official UKC Coonhound rulebook and the most recent Coonhound advisor columns in Coonhound Bloodlines and on the UKC website contain additional rules, statements of policies, and interpretations of UKC rules pertaining to the conducting of UKC events. All event activities, rules, policy applications, and interpretations are subject to the final decision by UKC in its sole judgment and discretion.
Yeah, there's quite a bit to be said there in that paragraph. It's just one paragraph, but all that, obviously, you write the advisor column, and that's something that the department heads have done for many years. Wrote an advisor column monthly that goes in the Coonhound Bloodlines. That is also available on our website now, in the news section, I believe, is where they post all that. But the things that you write in there also are considered rules and are in effect. And most of them are just interpretations, and they might make statements with regards to our policies and things like that. But it's kind of another a place for our listeners to go to, or our readers in that case, to go to, just to look at clarifications on certain rules. If they have questions about certain things, we have covered every rule in the rule book over the years, and most of them at least a handful of times.
And that preface continues here in the second paragraph, and it reads, all casts must be drawn publicly. Owners having multiple entries will have dogs drawn to separate casts if possible. Absolutely no alcoholic beverages or illegal drugs will be allowed on the grounds or while participating in a UKC license event or in the buildings the day of a UKC license event. Participants 13 years of age and under entering a night hunt must be accompanied by an adult other than the cast members they draw.
Yeah, so there again, we mentioned all casts must be drawn publicly. Basically, that is not necessarily for somebody to be able to come and stand right on top of the table and watch every little move, where everything goes and who drew who. You're going to find out who drew who when they call the cast. It's what that means is the intent of that is just that it's done in the open and not out behind closed doors in secret somewhere where nobody has a clue what was done or how it was done, Just that it's an open draw, it's a public draw, and there's nothing there to be hidden. Now, that can't always be the case in some events some of the major events where there's a pre-draw and things like that. Obviously, that can't happen. But this basically set up for clubs who put on these events, So, and not that, obviously, that UKC has had, we've actually opened our doors to people to come in when we did the Autumn Oaks draw. And I think a lot of people that came in to watch that were a little disappointed in that they couldn't get right on top of it to kind of see. I think they were more interested in seeing who they drew than they were about watching a draw, but we did make it public. So what we'd have is about a half a dozen guys standing along the line or along the wall somewhere watching a draw that wasn't probably quite what they thought it would be, other than they watched us do the draw, and that was it, Owners having multiple entries will have dogs drawn to separate casts if possible. So that means anytime, even whether it's one owner or multiple owners, that should include anybody whose name is on the scorecard or on the entry slip. So therefore, that's also another thing that's important, that whoever the entry takers are, that they make sure the entrant did, in fact, list all of the owners that are on the dog's record. And it needs to be only those owners that are on the dog's record and not somebody they just added, they sold half interest in the dog this week or something like that. If it's not been made a record at UKC, it basically doesn't exist when it comes to splitting entries. And the time when it's not possible is if there's not enough cast to accommodate that.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Next one, they're talking about no alcoholic beverages or illegal drugs on the grounds. That's pretty straightforward. That's something that, these are family oriented events. Obviously, where they're competing, but we need to keep everything above board. There's places to do your drinking and things, and it's not UKC events. We're competing there.
Participants 13 years of age and under entering a night hunt must be accompanied by an adult other than the cast members they draw. And that is basically that's a liability policy for United Kennel Club as well as the clubs. We're talking about minors here. So anybody 13 years of age that is a handler, it must be accompanied by their parent or an adult other than a cast member they draw. In other words, Trevor, if you're handling a dog in the cast, I cannot send my 12-year-old kid and ask you to be his guardian or be responsible for him. No, it needs to be somebody else that is not handling a dog, is not another cast member.
Right. So
pretty straightforward.
Now we'll segue into Rule 1, which pertains to all things deadlines. The first sentence there tells us all deadlines must be strictly enforced, no exceptions. Rule 1A reads, no entries will be accepted after the UKC listed entry deadline.
I think when it says no exceptions, that means no exceptions. So that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you had to wait on the train on the way there, or if you got a little fender bender, or the weather was bad and it just took a lot longer than you expected. It doesn't matter. Sometimes we talk about, what if we had some exceptions? What would that look like if we made exceptions? If we were to open it up for exceptions, I feel like, and not just feel like, I think it would be, if you're the event official or I'm the event official, and now somebody comes in, well, this happened, and it really sounds reasonable. And sometimes things do happen, and unfortunate things that you can't make it, that are totally out of your control, that played something into it. But now you put it on me to make that decision. The next week, the same thing might happen to somebody else, and that person making the decision now is going to say no. He might have a different opinion. That's not going to cut it, and I'm not going to accept it. Where do you draw the line? And if you make it, if you give it a 15-minute cushion, guess what? At some point at 15 minutes, you still need to have it. At some point, you need to draw that line. You need to stop taking entries. And why, instead of putting it on me or you or an official or any person, just leave it at the advertised deadline and let that be that. And that's no exceptions. And I think at the end of the day, it works pretty well that way.
Rule 1B reads, no scorecards will be accepted after the posted deadline to return scorecards.
That's this. We just talked about the listed entry deadline. That means when you enter a dog in the event, there's no exceptions for it. And every event also has a return deadline that is based on how far the cast got to go. Usually the club or the official will confer with the all the guides that they have and how far they need to go. There needs to be ample time considered for them to travel time to and back to the club, to their hunting grounds and back to the club. And then the other thing that should be considered is whether it's a 1-hour hunt, a 90-minute hunt, or a 2-hour hunt, add that into it. And then the one other thing I feel like sometimes our officials forget to consider, and that is our delay of the cast rule. Delay of the cast is when the cast has to call timeout during the hunt, and they have to give him 1 hour for a handler to catch his dog and return back. So the cast has to wait at least that. So let's say we have a person that is trying to handle a dog and takes all of that 1 hour, uses up all of that 1 hour. The rest of the cast has no choice by rule but to wait on him until that 1 hour has passed before they can continue on. So you need to consider that as well when you determine your return deadline. But once they've done that, for whether they've done that or not, whatever that deadline is that they have announced at the beginning of the hunt is when it should be announced. That's what is going to be in place for that event. They should note it on the scorecards as well, a return deadline. And anytime if I am a guide or you are a guide and they have mentioned their guide or their deadline, or if you're guiding there's any question, just let them know. If you have to go a little further and you're concerned about the deadline they might have, you might ask them what their deadline is going to be, just in case you might have a little input on that. Hey, I got to drive maybe further than this is how far I got to drive. Make sure there's enough time. But yeah, no exceptions for once it's made. There's no exceptions after that.
Rule 1C reads, deadline may only be extended if lone handler is required to go to master of hounds or hunt director for a non-hunting judge to finish cast.
Yeah, that one is one that you and I talk about. Comes up every now and then, and that is if, first of all, we'd always like to see cast stay with, even if you withdraw or get scratched, we'd like for you to stay with the cast. Sometimes there's something that happens, what have you, that it for whatever reason, leave it at that. There's only one person left in the cast. Everybody else leaves them for whatever that reason is. They now do not have any choice but to go back to the master hounds to get a non-hunting judge to finish their cast. If it's you and I, if you're handling a dog and I'm just your spectator or what have you, you cannot authorize me to be your non-hunting judge. You got to go back to the master hounds to get a non-hunting judge. And it is, we mentioned stay with the cast. This is, you hate to see this when that happens, but sometimes it's nothing. It's not a bad thing, but oftentimes it would go a long ways if the all they need is one person to stay with the guy, and that's one other handler to stay with him, and that they don't need to go back. But if they do, in this case, this is the only time that the master hounds may extend the deadline if needed. Their decision.
And Rule 1D tells us an appeal must be requested and filed immediately following the panel's ruling while panel is still assembled.
Yeah, so the procedure for if there's a question during the night hunt, the first step is to, if you don't agree with a call, is to ask for a cast vote. And that's under a hunting judge scenario. If you have a non-hunting judge, you just ask a question be put on the scorecard. If you don't agree with the call that's being made, you take it back, and if the hunt is being ran under the Master of Hounds format, then the Master of Hounds rules on this question. If you are not satisfied with his question, you feel it's not consistent with the rules, or a rule was misapplied, missed, not considered, what have you, then you have the right to request a panel to hear the question. And in the case of a hunt director format, it goes directly to a panel. And then that's what mentions the panel's ruling. If you're still not satisfied with the panel's ruling, you must request an appeal while the panel is still assembled. That means the panel usually sits down at a table somewhere, and they're discussing the scenario. They come back and make their ruling, give their ruling to the cast members, and it's at that point, if I'm not satisfied with their decision, I must request an appeal right away. And the reason for that, folks, is this, is there is no paperwork involved until or unless somebody files an appeal. And it's while everybody that is involved in it is still assembled, somebody requests an appeal, they'll go grab the paperwork, and then they can get everybody's information that is involved right here. So then there again, no exceptions to that. And we see that sometimes they will go outside, talk to their buddies, or half an hour later, they after talking to several guys, well, you should have appealed that to UKC. An appeal does actually go to UKC to make the final decision. And that's to avoid that from happening when they're influenced by it or what have you, you make that decision.
That's the conclusion of Rule 1. We'll take a look at Rule 2, which discusses all things related to the point system. And I think we're going to start out with Rule 2A.
Yeah, all right. 2A is going to be strike points, positions. So first dog struck is going to get 100 points for the dog that is declared struck first, 75 points for second strike, 50 points for third strike, and the last dog or the fourth dog struck will get 25 strike points. That's Rule 2A.
Rule 2B is to do with babbling, and it reads, dogs declared struck and determined to be babbling shall be minused on strike. If there's any question when a hunting judge is used, the cast must vote immediately. It takes a majority of cast vote to minus. A tied vote results in deleted strike points.
Yeah, babbling there's always a lot of discussion and debate on babbling. What is babbling? But there's one thing, there's an asterisk next to right behind the word babbling. And anytime in the rules there's an asterisk behind a word or next to a word, there is a definition. And you go to Rule 16 or Section 16, it gives definitions for that. So if we go to Section 16 and look up babbling, it defines babbling as this: when a dog opens 3 times or has been struck where no track is evident. So I think that is, there's always a lot of debate on that, or there can be debate on it, rightfully so. But we try to make, or UKC tries to make it as simple as where there's no track evident, and that is not, that's the decision of the judge there. If I don't think there's a track evident, I make that decision. And it doesn't ask me to be a rocket scientist to figure that out or this or that, but oftentimes it's not that hard to make. Oftentimes it's easier just to not make the call because people want to argue about it, but that's not the way it's intended to be. But that is the case there. So that defines babbling. And if there's any question on it, the cast must vote immediately. And it takes a majority of cast votes. So if there's 4 people, that means at least 3 of them need to vote one way or the other. Otherwise, it stays as the judge called it. No, it doesn't. A tied vote results in deleted strike points here in this case when it comes to babbling.
Yeah, I kind of like when that was added in. It like you were talking about, it's a judgment call, and sometimes it's tough to make the call one way or the other, but I think having this immediate cast vote kind of takes a little bit of pressure off the judge, and it lets the whole cast have a say on whether they believe the dog babbled or not.
Yeah, and the other thing we hear sometimes is that the dog that is struck under the minute must carry the track out, or it's considered babbling. That is not what we call babbling. It's not defined as that. The two are, there's no, that's a misconception. 2C is tree points. So the first dog declared treed will get 125 points. Second will get 75 points, 50 points for third tree, and 25 points for fourth tree. But then it goes on to say this: note, any dogs declared treed on the same tree 2 minutes after the first dog was declared treed shall receive 25 tree points. Dogs not opening on trail must be declared struck before a tree call may be accepted, is the last sentence there. So let's go back to the any dogs declared treed on the same tree 2 minutes after the first dog shall receive 25 tree points. So after the first dog is declared treed, you have 3 minutes on tree. The judge will start the clock right away when the first dog is declared treed. If 2 minutes passes, that means 75 is going to close. Is no longer going to be open, as same with 50 points. Third tree is also not going to be open. And so after 2 minutes, the only thing that remains available is 25 tree points for any dog. So in that case, there could be multiple dogs holding third tree or 25 tree points. And then the last sentence, dogs not opening on trail must be declared struck before a tree call may be accepted. Basically what that means, if my dog just falls treed, I need to call it struck first before I can call a dog treed. Got anything to add to that?
I think you covered that one pretty well.
Okay.
We'll move on here to Rule 2D, which is other. And it says, dog must open and be heard opening when declared struck or treed. Otherwise, call may not be accepted. Points may be split for position when called positions cannot be determined. I think a lot of people may mix this one up a little bit with another registry's rules, or maybe it's possibly another registry's rules where if you incorrectly call your dog that the judge can't hear, you get minus right away. But for us, and what we instruct our judges to do, is if you can't hear the dog that the person's trying to call, you just don't accept their call. It's as plain as that.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it right there, because if you wait around asking too much, your dog may have opened more than 3 times before it's declared struck, and then you have, or before it's declared struck, and then you might have kind of a problem on your hands because you need to call a dog struck on or before the third bark after the first minute of it being released. But yeah, so that makes it quite, if the judge can't hear it, and sometimes you do get in a position where one judge might have a little better hearing than another. he can't hear or can't hear the dog, So and if they don't hear the dog, they just don't accept the call. And you don't accept a call on a dog that you can't hear. It doesn't matter whether it's on a strike call or if it's a tree call.
Yeah.
If you can't hear the dog, he's not going to accept the call.
Yeah. And talking about split positions, it could be for strike points. As soon as you cut dogs loose, a bunch of them open at the same time, and people call, and it could be that situation. Could be that we're down in a holler and we get on top of a ridge, and multiple dogs or a tree in it or something like that. It could be a situation, but you'll find the breakdown of the points for the split trees on your scorecard there at the top of your scorecard. So that's handy for you in the woods, so you don't have to try to do that math in your head.
There you go. So I don't really have anything else to add here to under section 2. You have anything else?
I think that wraps it up.
All right.
And we'll take a look at Rule 3, which discusses all things related to plus points.
All right, under 3A, when dogs strike and tree and coon is seen during shining time only by a non-hunting judge or by a majority of the cast when hunting judge is used. But that means those points will be plussed if coon is seen. It says this, during shining time only by a non-hunting judge. If you have a non-hunting judge judging the cast, only that judge has to see it, one person. Or by a majority of the cast, if you're using hunting judges, and 90% of our casts you'll be in will have a hunting judge, which in that case means majority of the cast must see the coon during shining time. So whenever that first dog, once you've went in and handled all the dogs and everything, the judge will ask whoever had the first tree if they're ready, and as they get the go-ahead, the judge will start the clock. Don't start shining the tree before that. You may as well wait until and you have to wait until they tell you, okay, judge instructs you to start shining. It's during that shine time. Under the current rules, you have 8 minutes to shine a tree, and it's during those 8 minutes that the non-hunting judge has to see it, or if you're using a hunting judge, it's during those 8 minutes when a majority of the cast has to see it. Now let's talk about a case where majority hasn't seen it yet. Let's say we have a 4-dog cast. We're in a hunting judge situation. 2 guys have seen the raccoon, or maybe just one. And he says, I got him. Usually when they see the raccoon, whoever sees it says, I got him here. Here he is. Something to that effect. The non-hunting judge comes over to verify it, or the rest of the cast comes over for majority to see it. But let's say that 8 minutes runs out before the majority has actually seen it. That is a bad break. By rule, that coon cannot be scored as plus. It can only be scored plus if it was seen by A, non-hunting judge during that time, or B, in a non-hunting judge situation, or a hunting judge situation where a majority of the cast has seen it during that time. After that, it is what it is, and you can no longer score that tree plus.
Yeah, I think you covered it pretty well. The only thing I'll add in, and I don't want to go on a rabbit hole on it, is here it says the majority of the cast and not the majority of the cast at the tree.
Good point. Very good point. And that is, when could there be a majority of the cast not at the tree? Sometimes the judge allows somebody to go handle a dog on a split tree, and they, while he's not back yet, to help shine this tree before, let's say you have that situation where you might have 3 here at the tree. The 4th guy is still not back from handling his dog on a split tree, and only 2 of those 3 at the tree see it. That is not a majority of the cast. That's a majority that you have at the tree at the time, but that is not a majority of the cast. In a 4-dog cast, majority is always going to be 3.
Yep. We can move on now to Rule 3B. Rule 3B reads, when dog is declared struck and treed and coon is seen other than in tree, dog declared treed to receive strike and tree points. Dogs not declared treed, strike points only.
Good one. Good one. We talk about this one a lot.
Yeah, we actually just talked about it on the rule interpretation podcast we did with the field reps at Tournament of Champions just a couple weeks ago. But it's one that we're seeing pop up a little bit more. I think they're trying to apply tree but not declared treed to the dogs here in this situation. But 3B tells us that if there's a situation where you've declared your dog treed, we get in there and it's in a hole along with my dog who's only been declared struck but not been declared treed, I can still get my strike points plus. That's what 3B is telling us.
It is, and it mentions seen other than in a tree, a coon seen other than in a tree. So oftentimes that might be a hole in the ground, a place of refuge, a log pile, or under a house somewhere. Those are places under or other than in a tree. So the rules do provide for those dogs, if they are declared struck and treed, and as long as they didn't catch it or grab a hold of it, they are eligible for both strike and tree points. And the other thing with it, where this makes it a little different than a tree situation, actually a lot different than a tree situation, you may have dogs that you didn't hear here at this place before the 3 minutes was up, the 3-minute tree time. Again, when first dog is declared treed, the judge will start the 3-minute tree time. After 3 minutes, no other dog can be declared treed there. But in a case like this, if it's something, a place of refuge, what have you, something other than a tree, and by the way, telephone poles are considered trees, but we're talking like, just got to be reasonable with this, a place of refuge, a hole in the ground, a pile of lumber, whatever, rock pile, what have you, a lot of different places like that. But in this case, any other dog that is there is also going to be eligible to be scored. The difference is dogs not declared treed, they will get their strike points plus. So in this case, you can have dogs that get both strike and tree points plus, whereas other dogs in the cast that were there, they're going to get just their strike points plus if they weren't declared treed.
Yeah, that's a good one. That'd be a good one to put on the Master of Hounds test.
Yeah, it would be. And I think it is, actually. Yeah. So, and that's a good one, and that's also another one. Here we're talking about a situation for dogs that are declared treed, but you could actually have a situation where no dogs are declared treed. And I always say we're going to talk in this whole series. Eventually we'll talk about the stationary rule, not today, but we always tell judges, or try to tell judges, don't put the stationary rule on a dog if you think they are in the ground or somewhere other than on a tree, because the stationary rule is only specifically for dogs that are treed on a tree, but for whatever reason the handler is not treeing them. We call it's kind of dubbed the stationary because the dog is not going anywhere. Well, a dog can also be stationary in a hole or in a rock pile, not going anywhere, but it doesn't mean that the stationary rule should be applied because of this rule right here, 3B, because you can actually go into dogs in a hole without declaring them treed and score them. Whether it's one dog, not even one dog has to be declared treed. They could all not be declared treed, and you could still go in to them and score them. And the reason for this rule is sometimes some dogs just won't stay in a hole, or maybe they're trained to not stay in a hole, but this is also not to penalize them if they were to leave, So I don't know what else we can add to that rule, but that's one that I think the part that gets missed mostly when this rule is maybe when there's a little error in the judging on this is when a judge applies the stationary and goes in there and they're in the ground or in a place of refuge. I always say, man, if I'm judging, I should feel pretty bad if I put the stationary on a dog and essentially or technically forced the handler to call his dog treed, because he doesn't have to if they're in a hole in the ground.
Yeah, well, we can move on to Rule 3C here, and Rule 3C reads, if dog catches coon, strike points only.
So that could be a couple different things we talked about in here. Sometimes if they treat in the ground or whatever, maybe the raccoon wasn't very deep in the ground, they could pull it out. That's considered caught. Or if they're just simply trailing a raccoon, they catch it out on the ground, out in the open. Doesn't happen that often, but it does happen sometimes. Another one that I would add is even if they haven't put a mouth to the raccoon and they are just flat baying it outside of maybe in a hole that you can see back behind a root or something, but if a raccoon out on the ground that they're just baying, even though they might not have touched it or made contact with it, is still considered caught. And strike points only for those dogs, even if they've been declared treed. Let's say you have one where it turns out the dog is stopped. It sounds like it's treeing. It's just sitting there baying at this raccoon on the ground. You had applied tree points for it. You just simply delete those tree points if that's the case, and plus strike points only.
Yeah, and we've
Uh,
actually heard of situations of say a dog's treat, and you get in there and a coon's trying to bail out on it, and before you can get in there and handle your dog and start the shine time, the dog's jerked it out of the tree or what have you, and it's sitting there, baying it up. That's
yeah,
what we'd call a bad break, but you're only going to get your strike points in that situation.
that's right. And I've seen it happen, maybe on little sapling trees or
Mhm.
something like that for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah. There you go. So that covers C. So D, there is only says one set of strike points in case of split tree, and each will be counted as separate trees for tree points. So that's pretty simple. That just means even though dogs might be split treed from each other, those strike points, there's just one set of strike points that will be plus. It does. You can't have a new set of strike points for a separate track or a separate tree.
Yeah, it does kind of give us a little bit of information on Rule 2C, where it kind of gives a continuation that there can be separate tree points depending on if your dog were to split trade from another tree dog. So it's possible for multiple dogs to have 125 tree points.
That's right. Let's just say to make it very simple, let's have a 4-dog cast. You have dogs A and B on one tree and C and D on another tree. That means A and B will get 175. Let's say they all treed right behind each other anyway, and C would also receive 125, and D would have 75 in that scenario.
Yep. And then 3E is kind of a clarifying rule here. It tells us dogs that are shut out must still be declared struck. They are eligible for tree points if they are declared treed within the 3 minutes. If they are at tree shut out on when judge arrives, strike points are deleted. For all other situations, they are accountable for their strike points.
Yeah, I'll start this one out by shut out. There's another word with an asterisk next to it, shut out. So I'll go back to shut out. What is shut out? By definition, when a dog has not been declared struck before the first dog has been declared treed. That's what a shutout is. Dog is shut out only if it trees on tree it was shut out on. Otherwise, strike points remain live. That's the definition of shutout.
Yeah, pretty straightforward. Is if you're in the woods and let's just say your dog's treed and mine was split treed, I pull off my tree and we're about to head to your tree, but I decide to release mine and my dog strikes in and I declare my dog struck. I'll probably hear the judge tell me your dog struck for 25 with a line under it.
Mm-hmm.
And what that line kind of insinuates is you're going to be shut out on Alan's dog's tree if you go to that tree. Otherwise, your strike points are going to be live. So the only situation where my strike points could be deleted for getting shut out is if my dog goes and covers yours and is on the tree that I was shut out on.
That's exactly right. Yep, you got it. And there's that confuses some people sometimes, but it's sometimes you're confused because you think too deeply into it.
Yeah.
But it's you're only considered shut out as if you tree with the dog that shut it out, and on that tree. But if it's on a separate tree, then its strike points remain live or they become live. So, but yeah, oftentimes you will hear judges say exactly as you said, struck with a line under it, and that's just for their own. Just a little notation that in case this dog trees with this dog, then now I'm going to move that line up and delete it, put it through those strike points. But yeah, pretty self-explanatory. So I don't think I have anything else to add here with Section 3.
No, I think we'll probably see shutout pop up in some other sections, but that's the end of Section 3.
With Eukanuba, I've found digestibility is as good as it gets. I've also discovered daily rations are less, with a solid stool and no waste. I've not had a dog that doesn't like it or that hasn't performed as good or better on Eukanuba. But don't take my word for it, folks. Give it a try. Eukanuba, the official performance dog nutrition partner of UKC.
We're going to take a look at Rule 4, which is going to discuss all things related to minus points.
Yeah, Rule 4, the one thing is unique about that, it covers a section for strike minuses, tree minuses, and then the very last one is other. So we're going to cover all of them. Starting with A says this: after first minute, each time dog is released, dog must be declared struck on or before the third bark. Let's just stop right there for a minute. After each time dog is released. So that means at the start of the hunt, or any time a dog is handled for whatever reason and is recast again, whenever that dog is recast, the judge starts the 1 minute clock on that dog. So it has that 1 minute grace period where it is not required to be declared struck. It can be, it may be, but it is not required to be. But once that minute is up, the dog must then be struck on or before the third bark. Next sentence. For dog not declared struck on third bark on first offense, now we're talking about a dog that has opened 3 times but is not called struck yet on the first offense here. The judge shall minus the available strike points and ask for a call on next bark. So what that means is now we've got the minute is up. A dog has barked 3 times, has not been called struck. And 4 times is 4 times, you know, so 3 times technically here. So is what we're talking about. So now we've got a problem. This is the first offense. Judge shall minus the available strike points. So what's available? Let's say we have a dog struck in for 100 already. So we know 75 is available. So in that case scenario, he would minus the dog 75 if that were the case. Whatever position is available at the time when the infraction occurs. And the dog shall, or the judge shall ask for a call on the next bark. So what he's saying there is the next time the dog barks, he's going to expect a call from the handler then at that point. And then it goes on to say, otherwise, dog shall be scratched if not declared struck on next bark. So there, if you had a question about what happens if he doesn't call him on the next bark, ultimately the 4th bark now, what happens if the dog still isn't called? In that case, rule says the dog shall be scratched. And refer to Rule 6I for second offense. So we've got a second offense. What that means and talks or is intended for is for the second time that I have failed to call my dog struck on or before the 3rd bark. Yeah, second time 6I. I don't have to even look at I. I know what was under all of Rule 6, and any situation is a scratch.
Yeah, you don't want to be in that section.
You don't want to be in that section, no. And if you are, sometimes it's just your dog. You can't help it. But in this case, they talk about good handlers and what separates the average handler to the good handlers. The great handlers know every bark their dog makes, and they don't make this mistake.
That's exactly right.
So there was Rule 4A. These we're talking about minus points, strike minus.
Yeah, Rule 4B, and that's under strike minus as well, is going to tell us a handler calling the wrong dog on first offense results in the available position being minused. And also this one here has in parentheses refer to Rule 6J for second offense.
Ouch.
We know what Rule 6 is.
Yeah, I don't know what J says exactly, but something about to the effect that second fence, if you call the wrong dog, you're going to be scratched. I'm pretty sure.
Yep. Yeah, this
doesn't really matter when it says Rule 6. We're done.
That's right. Yeah, this one here is just as simple as us being in the woods. Me and you are hunting. Our dogs could sound similar. I may just be a little amped up, whatever the situation is. One dog barks, and I call that dog, and it ends up not being my dog. The first offense of that happening, I'm going to get the available position minused. And like you said, what's the available position? Well, the next one available in the strike progression. So if somebody's toting 100, I'll get 75 minus. If 75 is the lowest one that anybody struck in for, then I'll get 50 minus. Simple as that.
It is. You know, sometimes getting a hickey here is better than getting knocked out of the event with a scratch. You know, so sometimes it's like, okay, you think it's your dog, opens a couple times, and you hesitate a little bit because I don't want to strike the wrong dog or strike another man's dog or another handler's dog. And in doing so, the dog opened 2 more times or 3 more times. Like, oh crap, that wasn't my dog. And now but here again, that's the difference between, the good handlers. Part of good handling is not necessarily being slick as it is knowing every bark your dog makes.
Yeah, another good thing about it is the first offense here, you're just going to get a little bit of minus points, and you don't have to go straight to the truck or anything.
That's right. So that was Rule 4B. So we're down to C next for strike points minus C, Rule 4C. When a dog quits a track that is being worked and comes into cast. There's this is a good one for a little discussion, because sometimes there's a situation when a dog comes into the cast where the dog's not going to get a strike minus points. But let's talk about a couple of those scenarios, the difference, the varying scenarios here. We're standing out just listening for dogs. We're not at a tree or anything like that. A dog quits a track that is being worked. In other words, a dog quitting would be one that was declared struck. Comes into the cast where we're standing, just comes into us. Doesn't run. I'm not talking a situation where he runs on by us or comes through us, but comes into cast. And basically, if I'm judging, this should be interpreted as the dog comes in and it's just quit. It's just going to stand there for a second or whatever. That's coming into the cast. Coming by the cast looks different than coming in. A dog can come into us and keep right on cruising. That's not considered coming in by the intent of the definition here. That's the intent, or the definition of this means that it just came in and it's quitting here for a little bit. That's when you should minus their strike points. Now that is not the same, and don't be confused when you're at a tree, shining a tree, and a dog comes into the cast. Then when the rules talk about that, it specifically comes into tree, not into cast. Don't get those two mixed up, because sometimes they want to use this rule for a dog that comes into the tree after you're already there. No, it's not this rule that's going to apply to that dog. It's going to be a different rule, not this one. This is about when it comes into a cast, when a cast is not at a tree. Got anything to add to that?
No, I'm glad you clarified that. That was where my mind was at as well. So that's
It's a very little rule, short rule that gets that is not applied correctly or misused sometimes.
We'll move on now to Rule 4D, and it's another short rule, and it just reads, if none of the declared struck dogs open within 6 minutes. So that tells us that if none of the declared struck dogs open within a 6-minute period, they're going to get their strike points minus. All dogs that are declared struck.
Does not matter if they're working the same track or on separate tracks in different directions. It just none of the dogs have opened up. Sometimes, you'll see that where you have dogs that don't open as much as others, and sometimes you have a dog in there that opens a whole lot, and maybe sometimes kind of bails out a dog that might have otherwise been gotten minus for this. But yeah, they have a 6-minute window where no dog that is declared struck, none of them open for a total period of 6 minutes.
And one other clarification I'll just mention real quick that I sometimes get questions about is if, say, there's a 3-dog cast and 2 dogs are struck in and they've been quiet and the 6 is running on them, and the 3rd dog were to chime in and the handler strikes the dog in, maybe he has to in this situation, he's on his 2nd or 3rd bark, that would also break that 6-minute window, even though that dog wasn't already struck in and had the time running on it. It would break it for all the dogs as soon as he was declared struck.
That is right. That's right. All right, moving on to 4E. Dogs will be receive strike points minus for calling dogs off trail. Now that's for dogs that are declared struck, and for whatever reason you're going to call them off trail without a timeout being called under the provisions to call timeout. If you have a reason, if they're trailing onto posted land where you can't be, or onto where there's danger, or getting in with another cast, obviously you have to go call them off. If they're declared struck, you'd have to call them off. And in that case, you'd circle their strike points. But if in this case, this is just if you call dogs off trail, you're gonna get minus points. If you had to have a majority to call timeout, and if you don't have that, and you're gonna call dogs off trail, you're gonna have to take minus for it. This is a rule that, frankly, I'm surprised it's still in the rule book, because it seems like the timeout rule should cover everything else, and this shouldn't even have this opportunity. But I guess sometimes maybe if you need to move somewhere else, or I don't know, not suggesting that, I think sometimes we're getting on a bad track, and this doesn't necessarily give you the okay to call dog just because you have a bad track, or taking the low end of a strike that now you're in favor of calling the dogs off trail and taking a little bit of minus, and your buddy or another guy's going to take a big hit. Usually doesn't work that way. But anyway, so I'm not sure why that's still in there, to be honest. But it's one of those you and I talk about. Sometimes we don't agree with all the rules. This is definitely one for me. But hey, it doesn't matter. It's in the rules still, and call dogs off trail, we got to minus them.
Yeah, I'm glad you got that one.
I know. I knew I was going to get that one, and I was going to have to say that.
Well, it makes sense because this next one here, Rule 4F under strike minus, I'm thinking about getting 4F tattooed on my forehead so I could save myself some time when I go to events, because man, something that we thought that was going to really make it easier, and it has. I think it's a lot easier on judges now to make the calls, but there still seems to be some misconceptions and misinterpretations out of there. So anybody who's following along with us, and maybe you're preparing for a major hunt, or maybe you're a master of hounds or official who's getting ready to go be a master of hounds tonight, get out your highlighter, get your rule book, and maybe highlight Rule 4F or circle it. And I'm going to read it here for you. I may chop it up into a couple different parts and sentences here, but first sentence reads, if dog declared treat after 3 minutes has elapsed, no additional dog can be declared treat at that particular tree. That's pretty straightforward. That's what we would consider a closed tree. So after the three, you have the entire 3 minutes after the first dog's declared treat to tree your dog in. The second that's done, that tree is closed and no other dogs can be declared treat in. That part's pretty straightforward. I don't think there's any question about that out there. The second sentence is the one where I think a lot of the misinterpretations come from, and maybe it's from past rules or other registries or what have you. I'm not sure where the confusion comes from, but right here on the second sentence of 4F, it tells us dogs treeing but not declared treed when judge arrives receive minus strike points.
Can you stop right there just for a second? I know you're going to add to this, and I want you to, but that sentence is just as easy to understand and just as straightforward as the first one you read, as after 3 minutes the tree closes. Dogs treeing but not declared treed when judge arrives receives minus strike points. End the story. They receive minus strike points. It's not end the story, and it covers it on the next sentence. But you mentioned we have a lot of confusion or misconception about that rule. And it's that simple right there.
Honestly, I don't have a ton of color to put with that. That's exactly what I think as well. There, that Rule 4F, the second sentence, that's the one to highlight. Simple as that. It used to be more complicated. You used to have to score the tree before you could ever figure out what to do as far as minusing strike points or assigning next available tree points. Nah, we did away with all of that stuff. Minus strike points before you even shine the tree, minus the dog strike points, and that's it.
And in all fairness, that's probably where the misconceptions come from. They're still caught up in that old rule from I don't know how many years ago, but yeah.
No. Continuing on here, and this is the one caveat, and I think most people have a good grasp on the shutout rule, but the next sentence here continues, dogs shut out on strike will receive no minus strike points.
They have no strike points to minus if they've been shut out on that tree. You talked before here about the shutout rule or what have you, and it's only if for a dog that was not declared struck before a dog was declared treed, and if this dog that wasn't declared struck trees with the dog that shut it out. So in that case, if that's the case, that dog technically has no strike points to minus. But you're right, that is the only exception or the only caveat, as you called it.
Yep. And I didn't want to get into a lot of scenario discussion in this, kind of just analyzing the rule book here.
Mm-hmm.
But, one situation you hear sometimes is, let's just make it as simple as can be. It's a 2-dog cast, me and you, and both of our dogs are declared treat. My dog declared treat first, so we go to it. I handle it. We do our shine time, all that good stuff. I pull my dog off the tree. I have the option to either lead to you or to recast, and I'm going to recast because I wanted to have my dog off the leash competing. I think I can tree a coon maybe. Your dog is already in there, treed, your tree's closed, all that good stuff. I release my dog, it gets struck with a line under it. You're the judge, you instructed me there is a line under it, and my dog isn't as independent as I thought it was, and it goes straight to your dog's tree. My dog never had a chance to get opened or to even have a chance to get minused on that tree because I was shut out as soon as I got struck and headed to your direction. So,
but it was there when you got there, so it's now become a dog treeing but not declared treat and falls under that. But really, for you, as you know, you had nothing to lose there.
Yep.
you had more to gain than you did to lose or you're not going to get penalized because you were shut out on it.
Yep.
So even though you cut loose after it was already shut out, technically, it doesn't matter. Now under the old rule, it did because when it depended on how the tree was scored, you were going to get something here. But in this case, there's no more tree points to assign or award or anything like that. It's just as simple as when treeing but not declared tree to receive strike points minus, but unless. The only unless is if they were shut out. They have none too. So, yeah.
And the last sentence of Rule 4F just simply says refer to Rule 6F, which we know is the scratch section for champion division casts and off game. And I'm guessing that one's going to tell us what happens if there's off game in that tree.
I'm going to bet. I'm going to bet. I'll take you up on that. Yeah, so, you have a night champion or a champion or grand champion, they're treeing but not declared treed, and you, instead of getting your strike points minus if there's off game, your night's going to be done according to Rule 6, regardless of whether you were treed in declared treed or not. So, hey, there we go. So we're talking about strike points there. Got anything else to add in that whole section of 4?
No, I'm ready to get to the tree.
Okay, so now we're talking about tree minuses here. Everything before this, we were talking about strike minuses. Now we're getting into the tree minus section. All right, first one, 4G. When dogs tree and 1, a non-hunting judge, or 2, a majority of the cast when hunting judge is used, can plainly see no coon to be there. Strike and tree points are minused. So I think we refer to that as a slick tree. An empty tree, a slick tree, and I'm not sure there's a couple different names, but in any case where we've shined the tree and we can shine it well, and there's just no raccoon there, and there's not a place we've found. It's not a den tree. There's no holes to be found that we can see. If there was a raccoon there, somebody should be able to see it. We've looked at every branch. If there's nothing there, why? We're going to minus the dogs both ways. So this is kind of a negative section right here that we're talking about here.
There's a lot of negatives on here.
There's a lot of negatives on here. The good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, we'll get to the ugly here in a little bit, but this is
I think
bad
that's
here.
under 6.
Yeah, that's 6.
We're still in 4. 1 or 3, the plus points, that was the good, and I think 4 is probably the bad, and the ugly we'll get to in 6.
Yep, that's right. Next one here, Rule 4H. That's going to tell us after a dog is declared treed, at least one of the dogs declared treed must bark at least once every 2 minutes until caster arrives at the tree, or all dogs declared treed at that tree will be minused and the tree will be open again. That's just another one for people to keep track of. Kind of a lot of people who are listening to this have been in cast, but we might have several people who are listening to this for the first time, and this is their introduction to the rule book, and they're getting ready to maybe enter the first hunt. 2 minutes, you'll hear that often after you tree your dog. You'll say, "Okay, 2 minutes is running," or sorry, if a dog hushes up when you're heading to a declared treat dog, you may hear the 2 minutes is running, and that's just going to tell you that a dog has to bark at least once in the 2 minutes in that same area on that same tree, or the tree's going to be minused.
Yeah, and that only pertains to dogs that have been declared treed. So, technically you could have a dog that is declared treed that is sitting there not barking at all. Now there's another dog in there treeing, but it isn't declared treed. Guess what? The dog that's not declared treed does not it doesn't apply. That dog may as well not even be there. The judge is not going to listen to that dog, or that dog's barking doesn't count here towards this. Only pertains to dogs that were declared treed. One of them must bark at least once every 2 minutes. Seems like it should be more than that, actually.
Yeah, that's a pretty big window for one bark.
But. It is. Yeah. So, and if that happens, if the 2 minutes gets them, all the dogs that were declared treed, they're going to be minus their tree points. Remember, we're talking about tree points here, not strike points. And it's so they don't get minus their strike points yet, but just their tree points only here in this case. And guess what? The tree is open again.
Yep.
For another dog to be declared treed there again. It hasn't been scored yet, so it's still eligible to be scored, that tree. So it could open up again. And that happens sometimes. Yep. We've all seen it happen, where the 2 gets a dog and maybe it starts treeing. It's still at the same place. Handler calls it, retrees it again, and starts the whole 3-minute process again and gives it another first tree, and yeah.
Yeah, and
Pretty straightforward.
Yeah, and just I guess one more thing to put a bow on it is in that situation you talk about minusing the tree points. Your strike points are just going to remain the same they were. You'll continue with your strike points.
Yep, your strike points are still pending. You still have those. It was just your tree points that were scored. All right, next rule, 4I. When a dog that is declared treed leaves that tree, the dog's tree points are minused. Pretty simple. When does it leave a tree? Generally, if the 2 minutes it may be considered to have left, you don't know for sure. But generally, the way when it leaves a tree is generally when you hear it barking away from where it had been declared treed there. Mm-hmm. So that's a call that either the judge is going to make, and some handlers are, when they hear their dog barking off, usually it's the handler knows before anybody else if that dog is still there or not. With just by the way it barked and its bark sound and a lot of handlers will say, hey, minus my dog. But they don't have to make that call. Ultimately, it's the judge's decision to make that call and minus a dog if it has left the tree or is barking off the tree or away from the tree or back on track or what have you. Next sentence, if dog returns to tree within the 3 minutes, he will receive the next available position on tree unless all dogs have been declared treed. So let's use a scenario here. Let's say dog A is holding the tree here, or is declared treed. It's sitting there treeing. Dog B is also declared treed for a little bit. All of a sudden, the 3 minutes is not up here. Dog B, I hear dog B barking. It's my dog, let's just say, is barking off 20, 30, 40 yards. I can hear it's trailing again for a little bit. Makes some barks there, and I get minus. My dog's off tree. I get minus. But it shuts up. Next thing I hear it back treeing again. The 3 minutes is not up. I got minus my tree points. But now it's back to treeing again. The 3 is still not up. In other words, the tree is not closed yet. I can call my dog retree it again, dog B, or any dog for that matter. Doesn't matter if it's his first, second, third dog, fourth, any dog. If the tree's open still, I can still get tree points again and retree my dog again. So that's what that next sentence means. If dog returns to tree within the 3 minutes, he will receive the next available position on tree unless all dogs have been declared treed. Now, in a situation where all dogs have been declared treed is, let's say, a 4-dog cast, they go in and just tree, boom, 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 tree A, tree B, tree C, and tree D. They're all declared treed. While we're going in there, the judge started the 3 minutes, but the 3-minute clock is a moot point now because all dogs are declared treed. Anytime that removes the 3-minute clock, you can go right to them.
Right.
Once they're all declared treed. It's only until the tree is either closed, A, if 3 minutes expires, or B, all dogs have been declared treed on that tree. Either one of those two will close that tree. So in a case where the tree is closed, and now a dog, one of those 4 dogs, leaves the tree and then is minus for leaving, but then goes back to treeing again, even if it were before the 3 barks, because all dogs are declared treed, so the tree is closed. Yep. There's no more position available for that dog. But guess what? That dog now is a dog treeing, but not declared treed when you arrived. Could be.
4F.
4F. There you go. We talked about that. So there's kind of could be a lot going on there, and we don't want to confuse folks with that. But just read that rule, and I think if you just read it, I think it's pretty self-explanatory for that. But there's a lot that can happen within that. So again, here, let me just reread it. When a dog that is declared treed leaves that tree, the dog's tree points are minused. Period. If dog returns to tree within the 3 minutes, he will receive the next available position on tree, unless all dogs have been declared treed. Next, after 2 minutes of the first dog being declared treed, the only tree position available is 25. So there again, every time the first dog is declared treed after 3 minutes, the only position that's available is 25, whether it's a second, in other words, second and third or whatever is no longer available after the 2 minutes.
After the first 2 minutes, yep. Yeah, I think rule H and I kind of go in hand. I was kind of thinking a little bit about somebody who may be on their first competition hunt, because we hope a lot of beginners listen to this, or maybe some youth or different things. And you may be out in the woods and maybe say we're heading to your dog, and your dog hushes for a second and the judge decides to run the 2 minutes. And what I would sometimes do, or what you see a lot of judges do, is I'm going to be quiet and maybe I put my light or a low light or a laser pointer, or find myself a reference point for where your dog was just treeing at. Because when it's hushed, it's kind of hard to tell if it had moved off of it. So I want a reference point to be able to pinpoint where your dog was. So that way, on its next bark, I can tell, did the dog move off of the tree, or is it still where it was treeing at? So that would be something that you might see out there. So that's why I think H and I really go hand in hand together, and I'm glad they're beside each other here in the rule book.
That's a good point to bring up right there.
Let's take a look now at Rule 4J. 4J is going to tell us any dogs declared treed after 3 minutes expires and tree is closed. Call will be accepted as a split tree. If dog is on closed tree when judge arrives, strike and tree points are scored as dog left separate split tree and is now considered treeing but not declared treed on this particular tree. So this sounds quite a bit more complicated than it actually is. We found out a couple rules ago that a dog cannot be treed on a closed tree. So and that's a lot of experienced handlers or handlers out there are going to know that even if we're 1,000 yards away and my dog starts treeing in a general vicinity of where another treed dog is, that tree is closed, they're not going to tree their dog until they get much closer and able to 100% determine that their dog is in fact split. That's a chance you don't want to take, to possibly tree your dog on a closed tree, because only bad things can happen if you do that.
No, and you're exactly right. That is a rule that is, because a dog cannot be declared treed on a closed tree. And this rule does leave it up to the handler. If he does call his dog treed, it is going to be put down as a split separate tree. That's the only way the judge is going to accept it, as a split separate tree, and they will put it down. If you insist on calling your dog treed, I'm going to put him down as split for 125 on a separate tree, not on the one that's closed. And then it goes on, as you mentioned, if dog is on a closed tree when judge arrives, he is going to be considered a dog treeing but not declared on this closed tree. And not just that, he's going to get another hickey. I'm going to score him like he left a tree that I had him on as split, not to be on this. And I'm going to minus him for leaving that split tree, 125. And now I'm also going to get him on strike, unless he was shut out, which, okay, let's just say he wasn't, for being over here. And a lot of times newer guys that don't know the rules that well will get caught up with this rule and eat that at least one time before they figure out, hey, that was terrible of me to call my dog treed. And let me get to that in just a minute. But if the tree's closed, you have no reason during the hunt to call your dog treed, because if you get in there and at the point where you know for sure the dog is split, whether you know for sure by hearing it or whether you see it, you might not even know. Sometimes you get in and you couldn't tell a dog is obviously split until you get in there and actually see it. Wait till then to call your dog treed. If all dogs are declared treed at this point, you can handle it right away anyways. But if not, don't put yourself in position to take this minus. Now let's talk about the reason this rule is in here. Let's say it's the end of the hunt and I am down 25 points. Your dog is treed and the 3 minutes is up and my dog is in there too, and hunt time is going to run out before we get in there to where I can see whether my dog is declared or is on a separate tree or not. You're not going to accept my call. You can't on this tree. It's you can't put him on a split because it's not obvious to you that it's split. But the 3 minutes is up and I insist on calling my dog treed, I can. And in this case, just in case he's split, because time is going to run out on me here at the end of the hunt, and that's the only chance I have. That's what the rule was put in there for. Because I've seen it. It used to be in the old days, the judge would flat not accept it. And you'd get in there and the dog was in fact a couple trees over, but now it was too late. But that's why this rule lives here. It is for that situation, basically. So the only time it should really you should even really consider it as a handler is if you really, really need it. And it's at the end of the hunt when that's the only shot you have, as far as hoping the dog is split, and having an opportunity to get him treed before hunt time runs out. If hopefully I made that clear enough, but that's what's up with that rule.
Yeah, I think so.
So there's quite a bit going on there, but maybe not as just read it again, and that was 4J we were talking about. That leaves us with one more little section in this, the third category that talks about other. So we talked about strike points, several rules for strike points, and several rules for minusing tree points. And now we're going to go to other, which is 4K. In registered category, dogs' strike points are minus, or dogs are minus for running, treeing, or molesting off game. Then in parentheses, it says off game must be seen in order to minus them for running, treeing, or molesting off game. In the event the off game is a squirrel seen in a tree, and 2, the tree is an obvious den tree, refer to Rule 5D. 5D talks about if there's a squirrel in the tree, and it's also a den tree, then you're going to find that you can actually. I'd have to look at 5D, which is going to be I think circle points. And the idea for that is that sometimes you ran a coon into the tree, there was a squirrel in the den, and the coon pushed the squirrel out of the den.
Right.
That's to not penalize the dogs if there is a squirrel on the outside, but it is a den tree. So that's that. And so dogs are, in fact, minus strike and tree points in the registered category. And obviously we talked about in the champion division, if it's for running, treeing, or molesting off game in champion division, they're actually scratched. But this is for registered category other. And then it also, the last sentence said birds are not considered to be off game.
Yep.
And the reason birds aren't considered off game, it's not something that generally the dogs would pursue, or it's something that lays a track and then goes up a tree, which you can say turkeys might, I guess. And I've seen dogs trail turkeys and pheasants and things like that, but they're not. Just because you go in there and you see a bird in the tree, you're not going to consider that off game.
I think we got the minus point section covered pretty well.
Yeah, that was the bad.
That's the bad.
That's the bad.
We have some decent coming before we get to the ugly.
There you go.
Thank you for listening to the UKC Hunting Ops Podcast. Be sure to give us a follow so you don't miss any of our new episodes or content.